The change that Africa is making right now is extreme, to say the least. And last year, I did a video during the summit. It was one of the greatest African speeches that I ever saw. So I made a video on it. It did well. It went viral because, well, worldwide, because it was so personal and true about the time that Africa was going through last year. And boy, it moved mountains. Africa, congratulations with what they're doing right now. But I just ran across another video. Here, two, the same woman, Obi, moving forward into 2024 now, hearing her words ringing out in Africa is like, yep, that's it. I know the Bible says, in all you do get wisdom. The main thing is wisdom. The key to success, prosperity, and everything is wisdom. And with that, get understanding, comprehension. So that's why I'm going to show this video. These speeches, there's two of them, back to back. One is future forward, and the next is just a bold, straight up outlook telling Europe and the West that this is how it's going to be. Let me know what you think. Hopefully you like and subscribe, and let's watch this together. Let's grab a drink and get some wisdom and understanding. Let me know what you think as we go. Comment, please. Love you guys. Let's do this.
The uncomfortable truth of elusive economic development, Nigeria's century-old failures and prospects for a new Nigeria, so that you can understand why it is that I have not launched into growth rate and all of that. Because these are the uncomfortable issues that must be addressed. All nations that we have studied that have moved from mere economic growth to economic development had to deal with the issues that we're talking about. You cannot grow and develop until you abound in a common sense of vision, in a common sense of identity, in a common sense of purpose and direction, where your diversity becomes a strength and not a source of threat. The fact is that even following the most traumatic civil war that ended in 1970, the re-emergence of our country provided a context to rally the entire citizenry to build from country to nation, but we missed that opportunity. We just carried on. We did not build a nation after what was an unbelievable tragedy. We just carried on. Sadly, that was a missed opportunity. Is it therefore not heartrending that the present state of our country nearly questions our status as one country? Elite failure happened to Nigeria. The elite of every successful society always forms the nucleus of citizens with the prerequisite education, ethics, and capabilities, operating in the political sphere and public service, providing the great ideas to build the nation, and possessing the moral rectitude to always act in the public interest most of the times, because they recognize that by acting in the interest of the larger number, they self-preserve their own interest. Unfortunately, our own variant of elite have absolutely zero understanding of even the concept of enlightened self-interest. They would imperil the system in a consummate obsession with transaction mode as a way of rulership, not leadership. Let me just ask you, do you have a common identity with the person sitting next to you? Can I tell you, political parties have been part of the problem of our elite failure, because we really haven't had political parties in Nigeria. We have political platforms God bless the spirit of somebody who used exactly that word for me. They are platforms where individual interests are negotiated. We are yet to move to the ideology of having real political parties driven by a sense of nation building. And so if I ask you again and you say your common identity is APC, I can well tell what would happen. Because what would happen is that a new set of operators want to control statecraft. Would it deliver a different set of outcome? Not necessarily, until the faulty foundation is discussed. We have a faulty foundation. When you have a structural problem, you have to find structural solutions. Just merely changing acronyms and doing the migratory dance that happens between one set of acronyms and another set of acronyms does not solve the problem of the 50-something years of failure since our independence. It is a problem, ladies and gentlemen. If you are at a place where the leadership that is emerging would accept these failures and actually have a candid conversation that the society is forcing you to have, then would you say that you have begun to move this nation away from the norm? Because Einstein said that the same momentum that created a problem cannot solve the problem. If we maintained that merely having the APC is a solution to the structural defects that the society has, I would say to you, as a very, very neutral and good friend of everyone who desires to build the nation, that you must go back to the drawing board to look at these structural issues. For we have studied countries. You will not be able to get better outcomes simply by taking over processes and institutions that have not come to a place of common identity. Nigerians say that the twin problems of corruption and poverty present a common identity for them, simply because these are two things that have not discriminated between their ethnic group, their religion, and their region.
When you have a topic that says bold Europe, it definitely suggests that more people are realizing how not so bold Europe is today. And there is nothing more helpful to the human spirit than ownership of a problem, because you cannot solve a problem you deny. And so the fact that Europe is alongside its young people confronting the reality that there was once a Europe that could hold its head up and say we are bold, although definition of that bold from the perspective of an African would be nuanced. But it still is a good thing that we're having this topic. And so my number one point about bold Europe would be that it has to be a Europe that is self-reflective of history. Europe's neighbor, proximate neighbor, as a continent, is my continent. It's Africa. A bold Europe would be a Europe that agrees that Africa cannot willy-nilly just go with Europe on every issue Europe wants, simply because Europe once upon a time straddled Africa, colonizing many of the countries, being exploitative and extractive of that region of the world. What Europe that wants to act boldly would do in 21st century world is to recognize that there is a new generation of Europeans who actually look back at that history and think it was not a good history, and yet are very bold to build person-to-person, business-to-business relationship with Africa on the basis of partnership. The bureaucrats with the old and dated mindset of Africa need to retire so that this younger generation that understand that it is about the cumulation of ideas and the diversity of those ideas that will take us into a prosperous future that is equitable. Number two is that a bold Europe would be a Europe that stops looking at Africa as a humanitarian case. It would be a bold Europe would be a Europe that looks at Africa and sees the possibility of a contiguous zone of prosperity and stability. Not a Europe that makes immigration the heart and mind of its relationship with Africa. It would be a Europe. A bold Europe would be a Europe that sees Africa as a business case. A Europe that does not ask me as an African, what do you think about the Chinese? Why? You are Africa's proximate neighbor, and you're worried about a country that's how many nautical miles away from your neighbor. You have to be asking yourself, what did we get wrong? That's what a bold Europe would do. A bold Europe would stop being hypocritical. And what do I mean by this? Europe took a position around the issue of climate change and the various options of energy generation for the world. And suddenly something went off. And a redefinition of what energy security would mean in terms of sources of energy mix happened. So suddenly, gas has become an important part of the equation. Even coal has become an important part of the equation. And it actually confidently, in a wrong way, goes across Africa, picking up prospects of these resources. Whereas your proximate neighbor has just 35% of its people with access to energy. It made it difficult for these countries to have access to the capital that could develop their diverse sources of energy. And suddenly, because Europe's own energy security is threatened, it goes back on its word. A bold Europe would be a Europe that the word that I take that back. What it says is, what you're doing is so loud, I cannot hear what you're saying. Europe has to walk back on this. Because the truth is, Europe needs Africa. A bold Europe would look at the demographics and what the demographics are saying to us. in terms of the labor force of the world.
Yeah.
Our continent, Africa, is going to be 1 out of every 3 young people in the workforce of the world by 2030 are going to be coming from that continent. You called me to come. I believe you called me as a friend. And friends tell the truth. They don't do diplomacy. They are very direct. So, our continent is a continent that Europe today, with the present mindset, would miss out on. And I say it with every boldness. Europe did not see China coming 40 years ago. They didn't see it coming. You also are not seeing that there are 3 game changers that would make Africa become. These 3 game changers are Africa's young people, Africa's women, and technology. A Europe that is not seeing Africa the way it should see Africa is missing out on the business case that is Africa that could help Europe regain its competitiveness in the world. Europe's problem, it has macroeconomic stability issues, but the real issue for Europe is its competitiveness. And we saw what happened with COVID. How could the entire world collaborate to build one production center for all of us? That was disastrous. A bold Europe would look at that story and would use the data that show that Africa can be that place of diversification of the opportunities for structural competitiveness of Europe, and not anything beyond seeing the continent as a continent that it appeases by doing little pieces of development assistance.
Yeah.
A bold Europe, I don't know about that, but I do know that that woman is bold. Within that 15-minute, 16-minute time frame that we watched it, I could watch that again and again and again. Guys, girls, ladies, gentlemen, hopefully this knowledge that she has just poured out to each and every one of us can be useful to take forward into the future as Africa keeps on moving forward at light speed. Thanks for watching, guys. Love you all. You have a blessed week.